So one thing short, I think for Chinese students, there is nothing to worry. Just relocate, just go to Hong Kong or go to Beijing.
I think that's one of the most self-defeating move we can ever expect from Trump administration. So as Chinese, China is in a very fierce competition with the US. So if you are with the mood of competition, you feel happy about it, right? After all, it's very self-defeating. But as a human being, I feel kind of sad. So for those scientific research, it's not only for the US, it's for the whole human race.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our newest podcast series, Roughly Chinese. I'm your host, Mimi, and today we will be talking about some very exciting topics. Today, I'm joined by two guests, KurtisG of KurtisG Talks, as well as Mao Keji, a visiting fellow at Harvard Yenjing Institute. And we will be discussing the latest move by the Trump administration to halt funding towards Harvard University, as well as to ask Harvard to submit a list of their international students' information. So this is some very, very juicy and relevant topics today. And today there was even an update that Harvard University, amongst many other universities, are being asked to also halt all visa applications for international students from all over the world. So the Trump administration is right now stopping all visa applications. So let's get into it. Before we get too deep into this topic, I'm first going to ask the both of you to kind of let me know your background as well as some contextual information. Keji, if you'd like to go first, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. My name is Keji Mao. I'm actually a specialist in South Asia study. So I spend most of my time doing research related to India and South Asia instead of the US. But because of some the visa issue, the Indian government refused to issue visa to Chinese scholars. So I end up in the US. Now I'm a visiting fellow affiliated with Harvard Yenjing Institute. So here is the program called India Study in China. So I'm part of the program. So I've been in the US for a year. So this is almost the end of my fellowship here. Besides that, I had my master in Johns Hopkins University in DC, Washington, DC. And I also had my undergraduate degree from University of Toronto. It's another North American university. So I'm pretty familiar with the cultural and educational setting of the North America.
Very impressive. Thank you so much for sharing. And Kurtis, what about you?
Myself, not that impressive. I'm just an ordinary Chinese walking on the street. So basically, my connection with USA, or I don't have any connection to start with, but I did have my undergrad from the States, then from the UK, studying international relations and political science. Before that, I was actually in a high school in the States, staying with the host family, fully experiencing the American culture. So after that, after my work experience back home in China, I went back to the States after COVID. I had my MBA from one of the Ivy League schools. Honestly, didn't like it, so I went back to China, went back to my home. So now I'm here to comment about China. I mean, about the Harvard issue. So
amazing! Thank you so much for sharing. So let's get into it. Now that I know both of your backgrounds with the US and the education system, and you're both experts because you've experienced it and you've also spent time there. So you are able to talk about how it's changed over the years, right? Which I think the changes are quite large. So let's start with you, Keji. So since you're currently at Harvard University, I just wanted to ask you, how is it right now? How is it on the ground?
Well, it's the timing is actually very, very interesting because it's almost end of the semester. So the campus is pretty empty for the daily operation, but there are very, very huge waves of these big waves of activities coming up. There will be graduation ceremony, there will be reunion events, things like that. But not yet. I think it's this week. So it's just silent before the storm, I think. It's a silence before the storm. So you can see the empty tents, tents all over the campus. And those tents will be, filled with people shortly. So we actually we are expecting a lot of like people gathering in the campus, and I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of school pride coming up. And normally, you have nowhere to share those school pride, but this year we got a perfect target. We
Right.
don't need to name it, but the guy, the man, will be the perfect target, to
Yeah.
shoot the school pride on.
So you mentioned that there are tents. What are the tents for? Like, why are they there precisely?
Oh yeah, it's like, there's very limited space for the indoor activities. So they are like a huge, the in the Harvard Square and in the campus, they are like tent for the like temporary ceremonies. There's just like thousands of people will gather there for like outdoor graduation ceremony. So they just set up the tent for that purpose.
Have
But
there been any like protests regarding the
no,
situation?
not so far. Not so far. I don't see any kind of like very specifically purposed protest against Trump's policy. I don't see those things yet.
Mm. And personally, do you feel affected at all? Like, have you been talking to people around you, or have people been asking you lots of questions like us?
Yeah, weirdly, I got my question from Chinese side. My friend back in China, they, including you guys, uh, you've asked a lot of questions regarding the life and the conditions, the situation here in the US. But weirdly enough, I haven't get a lot of questions from the US side, in the campus. And we just
Mhm.
received some message and the letters from the school authority and from the institution we are affiliated with. Besides that, it's very little. I don't feel people are that kind of panic, but people are very annoyed for sure. But they're not that panic, I think, because
Yeah,
it's still very early in the stage.
yeah,
Uh,
it's still
they
unfolding.
Yeah, it's still unfolding. So the situation changes day to day. So it's just very early, and people find like, okay, let's just wait and see what will plays out, what will play out, right? They're not panic at all. I don't think.
Right.
It's if there's analogy, I think it's almost like China, like 2 months ago, under Trump's tariff,
Yeah.
threat. The threat
Yeah.
was something, was very, very kind of very intense, very strong. The policy, the tariff rate against China was more than 100, was looks scary, but Chinese people just carried on, right?
Yeah.
They were a little panic here because we
Yeah.
believe things will go to their normal circle, kind of, sooner or later. It's just Trump, it's just threat, right? It's not
Right.
there. And I think that Harvard and its alumni network is still mobilizing itself, just to deal with the Trump threat. A lot of Harvard alumni, they are especially lawyers and legislators, all those important people. I think they're organizing, they are mobilizing. So I think they will do something. There's something like in Chinese, it's called like 天塌了有高个子顶着. There are some able people, some people with very deep like capacity, they will do something. So
They
for the
will do
average
something.
people, average students, I don't really feel the panic so
Great.
far.
That's great. That's really good to hear. Thank you for being our correspondent on the ground as well. You're giving us insight over all these headlines, and it feels like, the media is also kind of talking so much about what's going on. And I think all of us in China are just like, oh my gosh, Trump's at it again. So I'm going to jump to my next question, where it's about Trump asking Harvard to hand over information from the international students, right, on their campus, and Harvard resisting. But I wanted to talk to you, and Curtis, maybe you could answer this first. Is this a new form of McCarthyism, do you think? And who exactly is Trump targeting, and what are his motives behind that?
Good question here. I feel like sort of, because like both Trump's political agenda versus like America's Cold War mentality back in 1950s were sort of delusional, and like it's a dystopia towards an ideology or a nations of culture which they are not familiar with. I think that's the first thing to start with. And the second thing, I think like the reason why Trump is targeting Harvard is only a phenomena. It's actually not the deep structural issues behind that. Basically, Trump's agenda like with his administration and his MAGA movement, is trying to tackle the structural flaws of the American system, which I think this American capitalist system has been seeing like tremendous flaws since 2008 financial crisis. So, Trump is always bashing about so-called deep state or special interests. To some extent, he has some point here that the US governing elites, all the way from Wall Street to Silicon Valley and to the education sectors like Harvard, I think they've been too hijacked by this like hyper-liberal agenda for decades, so that they couldn't even distinguish what's the interest for their own people versus the interest for their elites. It's like 1% versus 99%. Obviously, as a Chinese, I don't agree. I don't agree with anything Trump has been doing, but I do think, like, from his perspective, I do see the rationale of his agenda, which is he's literally trying to tackle the old system that has been like bringing that much suffering and flaws to both his nation, and also has been exporting the flaws. I mean, exporting the sufferings to all around the world. So basically, again, I disagree with Trump on every agenda he does, but I do see why. Like, I think he's trying to bring back the USA on the track. I mean, obviously, it's a track, it's a vision according to his own idea, which might be false. But again, I mean, he's basically, I think he sees himself as a rebellious fighter against the old system. Yeah.
Interesting. And what would you say about this old system? Like, how do you think it was implemented, or what do you think of the origins of this old system?
Okay, of course. I think the origin of this old system is actually, I think all the way goes back to at least 70s or 80s. 70s all the way from when Richard Nixon actually decoupled the US dollars with the golden reserve. Then the world literally runs on a fiat money financial system that gives these financial tycoons, the Wall Street, tremendous leverage over the normal people like us all around the world. Then fast forward to 80s, the US President Ronald Reagan, the guy intentionally had these so-called neoliberal economic policies, which outsourced all the American industries, American manufacturing jobs to like overseas. So that way, sort of the American middle class, the American manufacturing class has been hollowed out. I think that's how we today, we China, we have a very awesome, tremendous leverage over the USA. One of them is that, I'm not sure if you guys know, our shipbuilding capacity is like over 200 times than the USA. And that was because of these policies conducted by the past US administrations, which intentionally created that. So just to like put this context into a very brief summary, I think Harvard today is also a system of the neoliberal economy policies, which decouples from the Main Street. It colludes with the Wall Street, with the Silicon Valley, but it detaches itself from the normal people, the normal American working people. And worse than that is that Americans have been exporting this syndrome to all around the world. So the rest of us, we also have to be cautious against this like neoliberal crusade. Yeah.
Amazing, very fascinating. Keji, would you like to tune in, or would you like to add anything to that question about how this is a new form of McCarthyism, and who do you think Trump is targeting when he's asking for all the information of the international students?
Well, if you think about it, it's really interesting in the moment. Trump is the head of the US government for sure, right? It's in the law that he's the president of the United States, and he's the head of the government. And every single international students, who applies for US universities, they have to hand in their own personal documents through the State Department. And with the approval of the State Department, you get your F1 or J1 visa. So which means US government has every single student's profile. So why Trump bothered to ask university for that? And if you've been through that process, they have everything. So I don't know if Trump knows that he already had all those documents. So I don't know if it's just about posturing, or it's just like sending out a signal saying that I really want this, but he actually
already has it.
Yeah, already has it. So that's the thing. It's hilarious, right? I don't know. It's just funny.
Do you think in some ways
should we remind him? You already have it?
I think in some ways it's about threatening, right? It's about intimidating these students or making them feel a sense of fear of his power or, inserting himself.
Yeah, the whole situation is quite funny and kind of ridiculous because I don't see all those like demands, uh, you know, um, initiated by Trump administration against Harvard. All those demands. I don't think they are that serious. And Trump, it's more about the posturing than he
Mm.
really wants all those things, right?
Mm.
Are those students' profile that important to Trump administration? So that the record of participating in the schoolyard or campus protests, are those things that important? Are those things related to state security? I don't think so. It's more about a signal, right? It's messaging and it's posturing. It's a signal to Trump supporters that okay, look, even if Harvard is such an elite school, I still have my own way to kind of defeat it or have my own way to train it like a dog, things like that.
Mm.
So even if it's very elitist, I still have my own way to deal with it. Say,
Mm.
that's my kind of power. So I think
Yeah.
it's more about that. It's not about very specific like policy purposes.
Curtis, what do you think his messaging is?
Yeah, I think basically he's just trying to say this to the American public and to the world that right now he's in control. He's literally a single one individual in control in the Washington D.C. in the White House. The other thing is that he has been like fulfilling his campaign promise for those MAGA voters that he's gonna like tackle the old establishment, old institutions. And of course, I think that's the flaw of his policy directions is that I do agree there is some like fundamental or systematic issues about the American higher education, but just like simply bashing the Harvard or banning all the international students is not going to solve his issue.
Right.
Then I think there is another factor I think is also into his consideration is that when he was doing the campaigning, I think that also is to do with the flow of the American like election or American political campaign system. I think Trump was heavily funded not just by the MAGA voters, also by the Jewish lobbies, those Jewish financiers in Wall Street. And I think Trump, by taking their money, one of the agenda which they request Trump for doing was to attack Iran. But I mean, Trump is smart enough to know that, I mean, it is not a policy option to attack Iran. Americans lack the military assets right now. They wouldn't do it. So instead of attacking Iran, Trump just like chose the middle course. Because there was, I think that was last year or a year before, there was some like anti-Semitic issues in Harvard, right? So I think Trump just seized the opportunity and saying this, showcasing this to his like Jewish like founders, like his his Jewish donors that okay, we are doing something for the Jewish people.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's funny that you say that because it's not really anti-Semitic, is it? It is most of all, it's the encampments and it's the protests for the people of Palestine to no longer be bombarded by Israel and the US together. And instead, they frame it as this is anti-Semitic. You demanding us to stop the war on Gaza, the genocide on Gaza, is anti-Semitic. And then
Yeah.
he, like you said, does this to appeal to the Israeli Zionist Jewish lobbyists, right? So that is definitely part of the messaging as well.
Yeah.
And I do think, to both of your points, the targeted messaging is very, very specific here, right? And I actually read a tweet that I'm going to bring up and read to you both that Trump himself tweeted actually. He said, "Perhaps Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity if it keeps pushing political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired/supporting sickness. Remember, tax-exempt status is totally contingent on acting in the public interest." So he's saying that Harvard doesn't act in the public interest, which may be true in some ways, but then he does it in the angle of saying that it's because the students are protesting for Palestine. It's very twisted. It's very strange, the logics that he runs through. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are about this tweet. Keji, if you'd like to weigh in.
Yeah, I'm totally agree with Curtis. It's the protest, the pro-Palestinian movement is more like an excuse for Trump to start all those a crusade against Harvard. And
Yeah.
if you look at it carefully, you will find it's a perfect moment for Trump to not only kind of sending message to its own Jew supporters, but also to the MAGA supporters, because both of them have some like they've already harbored some hatred against university like Harvard. So for the Jew supporters, it's mainly about anti-Semitism, right? It's like people's general kind of unhappiness with the performance of Israeli state as a whole. And for the MAGA movement, it's mainly about the elitist, wonkish, like wonkism. That's very popular across the campus. So, by kind of defeating Harvard, Trump can showcase that he's really powerful, he's really able, and I find it's quite strange that because Harvard is like very big universities, like several thousands of people here. It's very diverse, right? You can find basically every kind of slots, every kind of people in the campus. So for me, it's just an excuse, right? For such a diverse campus, you just like go after one particular kind of faction of people. So it's just looks like an excuse.
Totally.
Yeah, and also very interestingly, the day the Department of Homeland Security issued their policy against Harvard, the exact day at that time I was in Princeton. I was in New Jersey, and I talked to professors and faculty members there. I think they all share the same kind of feeling. It's not only against Harvard. Harvard is just one example, right? If Harvard backs off, then Trump will turn to other universities. So people don't really care about the very specific excuse Trump is using because it's just an excuse. It's also an analogy between Sino-US tariff war. So, but it's kind of that situation is kind of unfortunate because the higher education, the research institution in the US is not only for the US. I think it's for the human race as a whole. For example, the Harvard University, they cure cancer not only for the Harvard universities, but I think for the whole human being. So I think it's very, very unfortunate that Trump go after those things with such a stupid and random excuse. Yeah.
Absolutely. Actually, to your point, I think both of you made such good points that this is an excuse. And I just wanted to kind of bring it to China a little bit and ask you guys how you think this might affect Chinese international students specifically.
Sure. Awesome. That's a very long and tremendous question.
Yes.
I think first going back to Trump, I think if his policy has that much impact on the Chinese international students right now, I do not think so. Because I think fundamentally, the very reason why that America breeds a figure like Trump, breeds a populist leader, is because there are fundamental structural flaws, first within its political system, then it transfers into its economy system, then business, then all the way goes to education. So I think that's the reason why they have a figure like Trump. And Trump now is like fighting back against the traditional establishment institutions. And Harvard just like one single example here. I think that fundamentally, actually, the logic chain says that the value of a Harvard education is not as what we thought anymore, at least. Because like even in recent years, all these American higher educations, especially in their postgraduate departments, they have created all these like very so-called DEI or like diversity departments or diversity hires, diversity headcounts. I mean, as a traditional Chinese, and I do believe like for rational Americans and all the other people around the world, I think we could see that these are the sort of like very delusional political agendas instead of like such a merit-based education system. So that's the first point, which means the education, the level of the education in the U.S. is not as good as it used to be or as we thought. Then like I think just going back to like what's the impact about Chinese students? I think for Chinese students, it's actually pretty simple. Just relocate, like just go back. We have tremendous universities in Hong Kong, and we have like Tsinghua, Fudan, and you see we just had the DeepSeek, right? That DeepSeek tech was actually out from Zhejiang University, a sort of like China's version of Stanford. And we also have like Tsinghua and like PKU, the Peking University, which are not just educating like tier 1 Chinese students. We are also like educating like those talents for the entire world. Now going back to the history of the USA, I think for me as a Chinese and also for most of the people around the world, we should not deny the fact that the education system in the U.S., especially after the World War II, after Americans hired that much, like former Soviets or like the former German scientists to the USA, the education level is very high, and it actually has produced tremendous progress to the entire world. But that moment has been gone. I think when the U.S. economy started to decouple from manufacturing jobs, decouple from actual engineers, instead of they channel their talents into Silicon Valley or Wall Street,
Right.
either doing the e-commerce jobs or doing the like the Wall Street finance jobs. Once that moment has begun in the 90s, I think the value of the American education has been sort of flattening out. And we could see that phenomena just gets worse and worse after the 2008 financial crisis, because as the American elites was trying to cover up their flaws, they were trying to cover up their own mistakes. Then they shifted their focus on education sector. That's why they breed all these very delusional programs like DEI, as I just said. It's just pretty much to cover up their own mistakes. So one thing short, I think for Chinese students, there's nothing to worry. Just relocate, just go to Hong Kong or go to Beijing,
Absolutely. Keji, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Agree with Curtis that the Chinese universities, they are doing better job now than before, but there's still some gap between the very frontier universities in the US and those in China. So I think it's fine to admit that there's still some gap between us and them. I think the Chinese students is one group that benefited this kind of educational exchange the most. I think it's all right to use US educational infrastructure to kind of facilitate the growth of China's human capital resources, right? You just don't have enough good universities in China yet, and you just take advantage of those in the US, and that's a win-win situation because the education is one of the most important source for the exporter of services. So if Chinese students go to the US and study there and pay their tuition fee, it's a form of service export to China. And Trump is so stupid that he kind of, just kill the hen who can lay the golden eggs, right? So, if you close down the universities, you just cut all those international students, then, US will lose a lot of money from this. And also, I think it's like lose-lose situation for them. And specifically for Chinese students, even if the policy document saying that the cooperation or collaboration between Harvard University and the CCP is the one reason that Harvard is kind of under attack, but I don't kind of feel so far that there's a specific target against Chinese students. But as Chinese students, we do feel a little bit more concerned than other people, right? Given the Sino-US kind of strategic kind of game is going on. So we feel a little bit more concerned than other people. But so far, I think it's not that, earmarked against us. But I do see very elite Chinese students, if they are really smart, they're really able, they will have more like options. They will have a second thought before coming to the US. Most of you have noticed that Trump said something, he's gonna transfer the grants to Harvard to some trade school, so vocational school, so they can train people to do the like factory floor, the occupations. I think that's kind of, it's kind of, I don't know how to comment on that, but I think it's ridiculous because they are totally different, two types of different animals, right? It's like very different things. You can have both, but if you transfer all your resources to trade school instead of research school, then you will lose your edge, right? In terms of research and development. I think if the long-term competition between the superpower is more about productivity, it's more about the science and technology,
Yeah.
right? If you cut your best schools' resources and transfer them to vocational schools, okay, yeah, your competitor will laugh, will feel happy about that. It's very, very good move.
Yeah.
Yeah, as Chinese, I feel okay. Yeah, if that's what you want, then you go for it. I
Yeah.
don't want to remind you. Yeah, just go for it.
I feel like with a lot of Trump's policies or Trump's outrageous statements, a lot of Chinese people's general reaction is just like, okay, we're just going to sit back and watch you do whatever destruction you want to do. So I also did some research about the statistics, and in the last academic year, there's over 1.1 million international students enrolled in US universities, 56% of them studying in fields of STEM. So we've kind of talked about the effects on the American economy, and if you'd like to elaborate, please do. But I also wanted to ask you, what do you think if, let's say, he successfully bans all international student applications, including and especially all the Chinese students? How do you think this would affect America as a whole, not just their economy, but also their scientific and medical fields as well? Curtis, if you'd
Okay.
like to start.
Cool. Honestly, I feel like first of all, the policy route which Trump is taking, I think he's just barely like isolating the whole USA education from the entire world. Because we do see right now, I think that China is actually filing more patents every year than the US does. So basically, if he cuts himself off from like Chinese research talents, from the European research talents, then basically America itself is like isolated world island. It's only a mere huge island. Then I think the other thing about like how that will affect the education system in the USA, basically the whole credibility of so-called, like the open source or like so-called sharing knowledge, sharing the brain power to the whole world the whole narrative will be compromised because like people will not trust the USA anymore. And that will only accelerate the pace which I think global talents go to China and seek for more cooperative approach. And also I think just like, I think KurtisG has some very nice points about, like some of the US universities still have these like leading edge technology, right? I think some of the parts they are still ahead of China and the rest of the world. But I think if Trump, he sort of cuts all the ties with the rest of the world, there will not be enough like fresh supply of the brain power coming to the States to exchange, to have more innovative ideas. The other thing is like, even if the US university themselves could just, in their labs, they could just, come up with scientific discoveries. But without the, without the application, without the commercialization, which China does very well on that matter, I don't think the US technology can actually lead the world market, nor can it even roll out from the assembly line.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's just going down, down, down. What about you, KurtisG? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's one of the most self-defeating move we can, ever expect from Trump administration. So it's very, very, very self-defeating, at least for two reasons. The first reason is if you look at the U.S. balance of payment, U.S. has been on a constant surplus in terms of service export, right? The higher education is one of the sector U.S. can easily make some profit and make a lot of surplus with countries like China, India, and South Korea. So if Trump want to, if Trump damages that sector, U.S. will lose quite a bit of the trading surplus. Trump is so obsessed with surplus. Then he is actually hurting one of the most important sector there. So that's the first reason. It's like very, very straightforward, right? It's just purely self-defeating in terms of damage its own trading surplus. That's the first thing. Second thing, if you think about the US as a superpower, it has the privilege to harvest most talented people all around the globe. Some countries more, some countries less. China, with a very robust and developed domestic economic base, so China actually suffers relatively less from those brain drains, right? Because like the smart Chinese people, they always have like a plan B. If they cannot stay in the US, they can always go back. So China is all right. It's not that bad. But for country like India, which its own domestic market and domestic economy is not that robust. and all those research facilities and all that developed, all those smart, able Indian people, they dreamed about going to the US and stay there forever. So they actually suffer from brain drain quite a bit. So if Trump really kind of damaged US like higher education and the research facilities in that frontier, then I think it will be very, very bad for its own ability to harvest those talented people.
Absolutely.
Right. So without this good supply of those smart people, like the science, technology, engineering, and the mathematics people from all over the globe, then I think the fundamental capacity of the US will actually get hurt quite badly. So as I just mentioned, the major power struggle, major power competition is more about the productivity and research and development. If you know that, then it will be really silly to kind of damage that kind of fundamental capacity if you have. So I think, in my view, it's like purely self-defeating. The lose is certain, but the gain is very uncertain. So I don't know why Trump is making that kind of move. And as someone from China, yeah, that's all I can see. I can say, yeah, go for it. If you feel good about it, that such a move, you go for it. We're happy to see.
Yeah. A lot of his self-defeating moves are very entertaining, I will say. It's very mysterious. We don't really know his motives, so we can theorize. Sometimes I just wonder, like, wow, you're doing all these things, but
Yeah, but let me say something a bit more.
please, yeah.
So as Chinese, China is in a very fierce competition with the US. So, if you are with the mood of competition, you feel happy about it, right? After all, it's very self-defeating. But as a human being, I feel kind of sad. So for the scientific research, it's not only for the US, it's for the whole human race. The Harvard it has the privilege to be in the frontier of the science and technology research. So it has benefited the human being for such a long time. So if Trump really damages the Harvard or like the higher education's capacity in that frontier, I think it's all the human being, the entire human being gonna lose from it. So as part of that community, I feel sad. And I really think we should be, more kind of cautious when it comes to fundamental research capacity like that. Because it's not only for the US, it's for all the country all over the globe. Yeah.
And kind of like what we were saying before about Chinese students specifically and how they can come home and how, there's still a gap, but China is developing and improving so much in terms of our higher education, etc. Do you think China will offer an alternative to these Ivy League schools?
Well, that's a very good question. I hope and I believe China can be a very good alternative sooner or later. But for the foreseeable future, in the short run, I think there are some very real difficulties in doing that, right? Because in China is a huge country. We have a lot of population, so the access to elite school is always very narrow.
Yeah.
And it's not even about a human capital thing. It's about a social equality and justice. Right? People complain about their access. People from some provinces, they have more difficulty in getting into those elite schools, right?
Yeah.
So in China, it's not only about the capacity, it's more about like social justice and equality. So it's very messy and nasty if you get close enough.
Yeah.
So I think, it still takes some time to prepare, the Chinese institutions for a huge international student population.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very good thing, to expect that, okay, yeah, we will host all those students. But, in terms of capacity, do you have such large campus for all those international students? Do you have enough faculty members who can handle those students very well? Do you have the language, the language programs to prepare them for the Chinese education? I believe if they come to China, they have to use Chinese somehow, right? We don't have enough English like a faculty member to have like to handle all those students. So let's just be prepared, right? It takes some time. And before doing that, I think we have to deal with domestic issue first. We don't want if there's like if there will be a huge international student population, I think that will trigger some kind of reactions from different domestic groups. So let's just make sure that everyone is happy with that. I think
Yeah.
that's very important.
Yeah.
We don't want to give foreigners very special privileges because they are foreigners, right?
Yes.
We have to take care of our own people first. That's what I believe. That's very important.
Absolutely. It's so important to consider the context of these places. And China specifically has a population of 1.4 billion people. The population is not small. So for me, again, it's just so fascinating that the US is choosing to slash international students when I actually do think they have the capacity and they could take in these students and they have been doing it for so long. Whereas China is still trying to prioritize and, develop its own education system and give that privilege to the local students as well. I think this is a great insight. What about you? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do have a follow-up comment from KurtisG's comments, which I do like. I think a couple points. I think first one is that like Trump administration and the whole USA is shutting down itself from the rest of the world for sure, starting from the education sector, right? From the trade. So I think that does become the reality that it's a certainty that there will just be more international students. They will relocate from USA to China. I think that becomes a very tremendous opportunity for the Chinese decision-making body to consider how should they reform or overhaul its education system that will be both world level, matching with the American level, and also that is very accessible to both Chinese, our own people, and also the all the other international students. What about if there's a like neo-experimental university that is not Chinese, not American, but is actually maybe co-run by Chinese and American, but also shared by the entire world? Let's say, the site location could be in places like Singapore or in Switzerland. I think we should run that sort of experiment because I do believe these very high-level professors or faculties in the USA right now, they feel like they have been persecuted by the political witch hunts. So why not start this new experiment? I think the Chinese government and the Chinese university are able to provide funds and some of the faculties and some of the infrastructures, and then Americans can provide what they have. I feel like that could be the way forward.
I love that you're already thinking of alternatives.
Thinking about that.
Yeah, Keji, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I totally with what Kurtis have said. In addition, I find that some universities from Hong Kong, they've sent out some signals, right? They saying that they're happy to offer like unconditional offer to all those international students who got affected by the Trump policy. I think that's a very, very smart and positive move. For those universities back in China, they have their like administrative and logistical reason to kind of act slowly. But for Hong Kong universities, they have more flexibility. So I think that move very smart for them. I think they benefit from issuing such kind of policy. I think some Chinese universities, after a while, they can also think about that kind of policy. But they have to, everything in mainland China or like in China proper, it's very sensitive, right? Because access to universities is always very, very politically charged.
Yeah.
So they have to be very careful in issuing such offer. Because a lot of people will cast their doubt over it, not because it benefits China or it's related to educational equality. So I think that's the
Absolutely.
major thing. You have to be very careful. And I can see, I don't know if it's Trump's intention, but Trump seems to kind of promote the cost of education equality as well, right? It says like, okay, Harvard University's first of all is an American university, but it hosts a lot of international students instead of American students. So by cutting all those international students, Harvard can host more American students, including those MAGA students, right?
Right.
So it's that kind of connotation behind that. It's very important. So a lot of people in China, they also think, okay, why should we host international students if the domestic competition is so fierce? Why should we prioritize domestic students, right? I think that's very legitimate concern. We have to deal with it, right? Yes, it benefits China at the end of the day, but if people have concern like that, you have to deal with it. You cannot just let it happen. So there will be consequences if you don't really pay attention to all those concerns, right? There will be very bad situation afterwards. Yeah, that's what I believe. Yeah.
I do want to add on that. I totally agree with KurtisG's comments about like fierce competition in China, also regarding the both the employment opportunity and the education opportunity. I think that is also something which we have seen that in China for thousands of years. I mean, honestly, I think since the very ancient Chinese dynasty, because we Chinese, I think we're a group of Confucius people, so we don't like to have foreign aggressions, against other people. So that means our internal competition is always very fierce. So I think since we are in the 21st century now, I do think our government should consider about like changing that dynamics. I think there's two fronts which we could change. The first one is about the connection between education and employment. So which means I think our education system has to be more closely linked with actual employment opportunities. Because we can't just produce, like tens of millions of undergrads, but without, giving them actual like jobs in the society. I think the other thing is, I think that what China should do is that I think we Chinese, we shouldn't just look inward. We also have to very truly have like global perspectives. I mean, by having global perspectives, I don't mean just, studying in the USA. I think there should be a general trend for the Chinese citizens. I think especially like more young people who are under 40 years old. I think we should actually venture overseas. I think we should have a tremendous wave of actually like Chinese laborers going overseas and bring our culture and actually bring the skill sets which we have to the places. I think especially like the developing places, developing nations that needs our skill sets, needs our labor, needs our expertise. I think these are the like future policy directions that we could think that will be not just beneficial to the Chinese, but I think will also be beneficial to the entire world.
Yeah, absolutely. And Keji, you literally study South Asian studies, so you are actively doing that. You're also studying places in the global South, or you're studying places that are not just exclusively the West, but also other developing nations, right? Do you have anything to add to that?
I think, to be honest, I really admire all those educational facilities and infrastructures in North America, especially in the higher education sector. They're really good. Even if you do South Asia study, you do global South study, you have to go to, the Western industrialized economy to study. So that's the reality. So let's just be humble. We will do a great job in the future, but still it's better for us to learn from everyone we can.
Yeah, just to briefly connect with what KurtisG said, which I truly agree. I think there's still some gap between the Chinese higher level education versus the Western American higher level of the education. Since KurtisG brought about the Western industrialized economies, I think that's the tier systems or multi-layer systems. I think that the world should sort of run on from now. I think first of all is that the Western industrialized economies, they are not industrialized anymore because they sort of they hollow out their industrialization sectors. But I think that they do have very tremendous R&D capacities, right? Their university labs. So I think what we should do is that the Western universities, their higher education, they should provide the the best knowledge talents from the labs. These are the research results. Then I think what China could do is to use these tremendous resources and tremendous execution capacity it's like to build up a platform for the world to test, to experiment, to run these top-notch research results coming from the Western higher education labs, right? Then after that, we could distribute these commercialized products or mass produce these results, mass produce these products to the global South. I think that way it's like a multi-layer system which the entire world could benefit.
Yeah, Keji, I actually had a question about this as well, actually to the both of you. Obviously the education system is so high and it is so advanced there, but do you think that actually reflects when it comes to like job opportunities? Do you actually think this education of these students is being utilized in a good way in the United States? Like,
Well, I think the US system has been running on the basis of the best mind all over the globe, right? Because if you look at the profile of the student population here, I think the foreign born students, they are kind of a very important part of the workforce here in the US, especially when it comes to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. For those like a hardcore kind of career, most of them like kind of, at least I think half of them are powered by foreign born students. So no matter how job market comes up and down, those students are still very important. They are kind of the backbone for the hardcore kind of industries. So in that sense, well, if Trump is cutting international students from coming, then it will have very serious consequences on the job market. But, on the other hand, there are also kind of humanity and social sciences courses that are not that kind of really related to economic competitiveness, right? You have a lot of kind of, I hate to name them, but, there's some.
yeah.
It's like, you study that and you kind of automatically you don't have relevant career for that. It's just for the sake of
Ideology.
the diploma you study that, right? There
Yeah.
are a lot of programs like that.
Yeah.
And but unfortunately we find the US students are more concentrated in those kind of more kind
Mm.
of unproductive programs.
Theoretical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
theoretical, and I just don't want to name them because it will sound bad, but
Grounded in identity politics, let's say that.
yeah, yes. You have that kind of okay. So it's very politically correct to study all those things, and I think Trump's hatred against Harvard and elite universities are kind of related to those programs. I think
Mm.
Trump per se does not hate that STEM so much because he knows like STEM's very important to US competitiveness. So, but yeah, I think for those programs, if you are Chinese students in those programs, you should have a second thought. You may switch to something more kind of down to the earth,
Mm.
or you just stay in China instead of going abroad because at the end of the day it will be the same.
Yeah.
I know pretty, US is slightly better situation if it comes to Great Britain. They have 1 year master programs, right? They have and the 1 year programs you basically learn very limited stuff if it's just 1 year. And the employer in China kind of realized that okay, you're from Great Britain, you're a master student, yes, for sure, but it's only 1 year. They won't like before, if you're from abroad, yeah, study overseas, then you're good. No, that's definitely not a situation. In Chinese, we call it sui, right? I don't know what's the English equivalent for that, but sui. It's like water. I don't know if you know that, like, the right English expression for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get what you're saying. And I wanted to kind of go back to your point about, international students being the backbone in a lot of ways. And Trump's self-defeating policies will again be slashing the backbone, right? What are your thoughts? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I myself was a social science major from the States. So, I mean, sadly on that. But I do have like two comments about like
Me too.
okay,
I, I
cool,
I also
awesome,
study international relations and economics and political science, so I'm one of them.
awesome.
Yeah,
So we
let's
are
just be
on the
clear.
same team then.
Yeah, I'm targeting
Great.
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, so I think just two fundamental points about the mismatch between the Western higher education versus its like job sector. I think the first one, just Keji said, like the USA, I think since they were like sort of captured by the Wall Street and all the other, like the financial elites, that they had those weird ideological departments in their higher educations, like gender studies or like racial studies, right? I mean, obviously, I don't think there's like that much practical value out of these departments, right? And also, they are not based on the morally righteous standing point. It's actually because if you read a book by an Indian American called Vivek, the guy is one of the Trump's guy. So he basically said the reason why the Wall Street is behind all those so-called woke ideology, the American liberal left, is because they were trying to cover up the mess which they left in the 2008 financial crisis. They were basically trying to like divert the attention from American people's hatred on them into like other channels. They were trying to divide the American people. Yeah. Then I think the second point is about like, I think it's more like severe mismatch between the education and the job market. Personally, I think my idea is that since the 1980s or after the Cold War, after the 1990s, I think the basic direction of the American technology progress has been flawed. Because before 1990s, all these progress were based on industrial engineering, like actual engineering that could people on the moon, could send these space satellites or could cure the cancer. But I think after 90s, as I said, I think America has been captured by the Wall Street financial elites and also by the Silicon Valley industrial complex. So basically, now the higher end market jobs, the respectable ones in America, becomes either you are working at Wall Street in finance, private equity, or if you are working at Microsoft or Amazon, e-commerce or so-called digital tech. But we have to realize these so-called digital techs, they couldn't solve some of the urgent issues which we face right now. Like we face climate change, we face the rising cases of cancer and all the other diseases, right? So I think that's the shift that America has to go through if it wants to still, sort of lead the world in terms of technology progress. They should, redirect themselves into industrial engineering, like chemistry, like biology, these fundamental sciences, instead of, just focusing on finance or focus on so-called like digital computer engineering.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you there. And I love that you say Silicon Valley Industrial Complex.
That's my own copyright.
Yeah, that's Kurtis's original. I mean, this conversation has been so juicy and productive, and I've been learning so much. I wanted to pivot slightly and kind of go back to about Trump kind of sucking up to the Israeli lobby, right? And trying to make his promises to the Zionist Jewish billionaires. And now, that he's been doing so by targeting the international students, I find it very, very interesting about this whole idea of making America great again. I sometimes I just wonder, and maybe this is quite a broad question that strays a bit away from the topics we've talked today, but what is the greatness of America?
Yeah, I do think US is a great country. After all, it has been on the leading position for almost a century, right? If it's not a great country, how can it stay there for so long? And to be honest and to be fair, I think it's been doing a relatively good job. Congratulate the US for doing that. But it will not guarantee it will have another century to be in the leading position, right? That's why I think we all have to, as a Chinese, I feel very eager from bottom of my heart to learn from the US because it's been in the position for so long. You should always learn from someone who is in a leading position, right? You always benefit from the learning experiences. You have to adapt a very steep learning curve if it comes to the US. That's why I feel so fulfilled every day here in Harvard that every day I learn something new. I learn how to how those very elite US students and faculty members, they think about the world, they think about China, they think about everything. So I feel it's a very fulfilling experience here. But you have to in the leading position, you have to face all the pressure from all the competitors around the globe, right? Especially from China. So as someone who's been in China and the US, both places for some time, I find that China has a pretty good chance to kind of catch up. And because we are doing certain things correctly, and we are kind of experiencing something we've never seen in human race history. We all know that China is a socialist country led by Communist Party, right? It's totally different from every single other socialist state came before China. So we all know, if you are a student of Marx-Leninist theory, the socialism is supposed to be more advanced than capitalism in theory, right? But we've never seen in history that there is a socialist state which is materially more advanced and prosperous than that of Western industrialized economies. If you look at the history, you'll find all those countries in the frontier of prosperity, they are Western industrialized states, right? So all those socialist states like Soviet Union, Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, China, yeah, in theory we are more advanced, but in reality we kind of lag behind a little bit. But if you think about this, it's very, very exciting moment for now. Why? Because China can be the very first socialist state, which is in the real, genuine position, in a genuine leading position, more advanced than that of the Western industrialized economies. That's first experience in history. And we are experiencing that, right? A lot of people in the US, I've come here for a year for this time. Before I studied here, but this time I stayed here for almost a year already. I talked to a lot of people. They talk about the rise of China. They talk about China's EV sectors. They talk about China's scientific research. But I don't think many of them realize many of China's fundamental strengths and advantages actually came from socialism. Right, we have very, very good educational and healthcare system. So, because of that, we have almost 5 million students coming out of school campus every year. So if China is like US with like an outrageous tuition fee, it's not possible to have such a big population of talented people and engineers and the technicians, right? And if you look at China, they always complain that Chinese people invest a lot, save and invest a lot, but not consumption is always low. But if you think about it, if you are a civilizational state, you always care about the future. You do invest instead of consume. So investment takes different forms. Building physical infrastructure is just one way of spending your money. You can always like spend on R&D. You can spend on healthcare and education. All those are also investment. So actually, if you look at China's spending structure, you will find China is a country which really cares about the future. We save the best thing for the future. That's the thing really different. And we care about people from bottom of the society. Right, we have like poverty like reduction programs all over the globe, and in China you don't find a lot of homeless people on the streets. So with that kind of very able government, you see the dynamic. You see why it will be in the leading position. That's why I'm so confident. And I don't think that's related to US. We just focus on ourselves and try to do everything the best. Then surpassing US will happen almost automatically. You are doing all those things not because you want to kind of defeat the US or you want to surpass the US. It's not like that. It's just we just try to do our best. Then the surpassing and the competition always come after that. It's automatic, right? Think about it. Chinese population is almost 4 times that of the US. So if we have GDP per capita, half of the US, the sheer size or the absolute size will be 2 times larger than that of US in terms of GDP in total. So I think that's very, very, that will come very soon. We don't want to defeat the US, but the comparison is just automatic. Yeah. That's what I would add. Maybe it's too grand to put in this
Amazing.
situation.
These are some really amazing observations. I appreciate you for sharing them. And I think adding a little bit, I think that, like you said, it is undeniable, to stay humble and to understand that China has been developing and that China has had a lot to learn from the US. But I do think what China takes away from the US is still different in terms of methodology. And it treats people fundamentally in a different way to how the US and US Western capitalism treats people, right? We've seen maybe the sharing of the information or the learning and influence of the information, but we also have seen a divergence and an alternative to US capitalism begin or thrive, in fact, So if you'd like to add to that.
So yeah, I truly agree. I think this will literally be the first time that the socialist state in the world is leading the entire world and is actually sort of overpassing the Western industrialized economies. I think that also kind of matches with the China's special characters, because I think that since the very ancient Chinese dynasties, our dynasties has been run on this Confucian idea. I think some of the core idea in the Confucian philosophy is that you have to take care of your own people, and you have to have this like fair and like equal distribution system among society. So I think that sort of naturally matches. I guess that's the reason why some of the Western countries which tried socialism but they fail, I guess it's because their fundamental philosophy diverse away from the socialist ideas. Now, I think going back to the Trump's MAGA question, what exactly MAGA wants? I think very interestingly, I do think MAGA wants exactly what every Chinese wants. Honestly, I think I think Trump is actually trying to copy China's playbook, but I'm just not sure if he's able to do it. So basically, we could see like Trump is attacking on Harvard, these higher education institutions. I think he's trying to get rid of the entrenched elites or the entrenched special interest groups in the USA. So that is first to pave the ground for more like fair and like just distribution of the social resources. Then the other thing is that Trump has always been focusing on, bring back the jobs, these manufacturing jobs, the glory manufacturing jobs, the manufacturing sectors for the USA. I think that is also something which we Chinese understand very well, is that we don't just like doing the research, we also actually apply them in very fundamental and massive scales. I think so basically, make America great again. I think Trump is just like stealing China's playbook. But I think given the dire situation in the USA right now, I don't think he could succeed. Now, just going back to your question about like democracy and so-called like freedom of speech, I feel like the whole world has been sort of brainwashed by the Western propaganda since Cold War for so long. America, to some extent, is not a liberal democracy; it's actually a constitutional republic, because not everyone gets to vote. I mean, they could vote, but not necessarily their vote counts. And now America has all these special interest groups called, super PACs. It's called like Super Political Action Committee. Basically, they legalize you donating money to the politicians which you favor. And most of the time, that money actually largely attributes to those very big donors, the special corporate interests. So now we could see that system is actually is more about procedures instead of actually following a more fair and like justified like allocation system for every strata of the society. That's the reason why we see Trump rising, because he had seen these problems in USA. We are just not sure if he can fix it. Then the other thing about the so-called freedom of speech, I think we've seen that, especially since after COVID. I think you could see that American companies like Facebook and even previously Twitter, before Elon Musk bought Twitter, they would literally actively like censor some of the comments just based on political biases, based on the political preference of their investors, of their owners. So we could see America is not the so-called, they don't actually have the so-called freedom of speech. They only have the limited scope of freedom of speech when this speech does not touch upon the fundamental interest or the fundamental conflict of interest of the American elites. So I think the world should get to see that. And we as Chinese, I think we should devise our own model of so-called freedom of speech. We should be more structurally seeing the issue and understanding why what Americans have been saying are not the case. Yeah.
Absolutely. These are such incredible points. And I think both of you have raised so much that I think people can really sit on and ponder with. And I love what the both of you talk about when it comes to, a socialist China surpassing the US, but not in the way to defeat the US, but to actually not only learn from the US's technological capabilities, but also learn from the US's mistakes as well. And I think that is all we have time for. Let us wrap up this conversation, and thank you both so much for being here, for taking part in this amazing discussion. I will be very eagerly awaiting to hear any of the updates. I was going to ask you about what developments you think will happen in the future, but I also think that it is so unpredictable that we might not even know. If you have anything to add, please feel free to. And yeah, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. And if you have any closing remarks, please feel free.
After you.
Well, it's almost the end of my stay in the US. And I really thank the old US grant me the opportunity to stay here and give me the chance to observe and to learn with the US for the past few months, almost a year. I really thank that US, that version of USA. But I just feel really sad that the new version of USA and Trump won't grant that kind of opportunities for international students.
Mm.
I think even if US is a decline, US can still have very good position in the global landscape because it's a huge country with a lot of resources domestically. Just don't panic. If you panic, you go paranoid, then you're gonna hurt yourself even more. So as Chinese, we don't want US go in that kind of bad shape. I really wish US the best because our competition is more about do whatever you can the best. It's not about defeating the other side, right? It's more about do your best. So I think if both China and the US they can do their own best job, I think it's like the best outcome. So I think that's my comment. But I don't think that coming. I feel Trump is doing a lot of things self-defeating and for very narrowly defined interests of his core base of supporters, but which is not going to be beneficial for the whole country. I see a lot of that kind of thing coming up, so I feel kind of unfortunate. I really want to see a more kind of house competition or house kind of rivalry between the two big states.
Yeah, and I think it's even more unfortunate that the US, to be the best, it actually always does it by damaging others, right? Which I don't think China does. It always does that by being extremely violent or military intervention into other countries, and even doing this to not only the international students but also the people in the US as well. Do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, just compared with KurtisG, I feel like I'm way more cynical. So I feel like there are 2 points which I want to address. We know that the American empire is going down. I think that's for sure. I think there are 2 routes we should think about. I think the first one is that I do wish all the best for the Trump and the United States, so that if Trump could use his policies, use his whole coherent set of policies to stabilize his own nation, and then America could come out with a new version, not that imperialistic anymore, and also with more fair distribution of resources among its own people, feed its own people well, not that much homeless anymore. We will welcome that. We will welcome America to rejoin the international community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the second point is that now, especially for us Chinese to consider, and also with our global South brothers and sisters, is actually now America is not able to fill that leading status. So we should fill the vacuum, but in order to fill the vacuum with all the people from the global South, I think China should truly devise a coherent set of strategy and narratives, and a set of the development models that could be applicable to at least most of the people around the world, to at least could bring majority of the people the happiness around this earth.
Wow, that's a wonderful place to end
you.
on. Thank you both so much. Thank you, KurtisG, and thank you, Kurtis.
Thank you.
This has been the first episode of Roughly China. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment down below, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for having us. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.